Chapter 6. Was it just an accident that he was here on this uninhabited island? Abel began to wonder. Was he being singled out for some reason? Was he being tested? If so, why? Didn't it prove his worth that such a one as Amanda loved him? Did it? Why did Amanda love him? He wasn't all that handsome, was he? And he had no particular accomplishments. What sort of mouse was he? Wasn't he really a snob and a fop and a frivolous on serious occasions, as she had once told him during a quarrel? He had acted silly even at his own wedding, grinning during the solemnities, clowning when cutting the cake. What made him act that way when he did? Full of such questions, he went to wash his face in the river that kept him captive and drank some of its water. It was foolish, he realized, to harbor a grudge toward this river. It had no grudge against him. It happened to be where it was. It had probably been there for eons. He found a bush of ripe raspberries and ate his fill for breakfast. This was his third morning on the island. Carefully cracking the few seeds that remained in his mouth, he thought again about a bridge. He decided he could make one of rope, a single floating strand, on which he could pull himself across. It would have to be strong enough so the current wouldn't tear it, and light enough so he could sling it across to the other side. He would tie a stone on one end and try to make a catch in some bushes he picked out on the far shore. This time he proceeded methodically, not in nervous haste. He went first to defecate behind a rock, though no one was watching. Then he cut long blades of tough crab grass and sat cross-legged on the ground, tearing the grass lengthwise, so that each blade became many strands. He worked this way for hours. He enjoyed the absorbing task. When he felt he had enough, he proceeded to braid and weave the long fibers to form a continuous rope. Occasionally, he would encircle the rope with a few strands of grass and tie a firm knot to prevent unraveling. He was doing the kind of thing he had often, leaning on his cane, watching others do. Noon passed. His thoughts concerned only rope, its making, and how he would use it. But as the rope grew, Amanda, who was always somewhere in his mind, came forward. What was she thinking, he wondered. No doubt they had searched for him in a large area around the cave, dreading to find him injured or dead. But what did they make of not finding him at all? Had they gone after him right away, the hurricane would have prevented them from getting very far. He was certain Amanda had to be restrained from risking her life to aid him. They must have spent a sleepless night inside the cave and started looking early in the morning when the storm was over. By now the whole town was certainly looking. His powerful father would have seen to that. They might look pretty far, but this far? Never. How frantic Amanda must be. But so much greater joy when she had him back again. It was evening when he'd woven enough rope to span the river. He had it neatly coiled on the ground in a large ring. It would be wise to wait for morning, though, before crossing over. If he crossed now, he'd have to sleep on the other side. Or he'd be less at home than he was here, and he was tired. He ate the seed from the grass he'd worked with. It was scattered all around him. He drank at the river, and then, for diversion, wandered toward the interior of the island, chewing on fragrant raspberries as he wandered. In a pleasant place, open yet sheltered by overhanging boughs, the hollow bore of a dead tree lay on the ground. He entered. Recalling his fall from the birch, he felt this log would afford a safer night's lodging. He went to work carting out some of the rot. The log had limbs, which were also hollowed by decay. It amounted to a house with several wings. No beast of prey could fit into that log, or reach beak, talon, fang, or claw deep enough to get at Abel where he planned to sleep. As for snakes, there were stones with which he could close the entrance when he went in. He lay on his side for a while, Amanda's scarf held with both paws to his breast. Having worked all day seriously and well, he was warmed with a proper self-regard. He had provided food and shelter for himself and woven a rope which would be his bridge to freedom, home, and love. He spent that night in the log, eager for the morning. He believed he could shoot his rope across the river by using his suspenders as a slingshot. Chapter 7. At sunrise, Abel was at the river, where he washed, had breakfast, and got to work on his bridge. He set up his suspenders as a slingshot, fastening one end to a stout bush. Then he arranged his rope in a few long, loose loops that would straighten out easily as it arched over the gap. He tied one end to a stone and the other to a bush, made a pocket in the suspenders to hold the stone, and was ready for his shot. Grasping the stone in its pocket and leaning backward, he pulled, mightily stretching the suspenders as far as the elastic would allow, and aimed his bridge or lifeline in the direction of the bushes on the opposite shore. Fervently hoping for success, he released his hold. The stone, with the rope trailing it, made a small parabola in the air, and the line, as if with a sigh, fell limply into the river only 90 taels away. He quickly hauled it in, a bit of faith still remaining. He set up his machinery and tried again, using a lighter stone. The result was even more disappointing. The rope was wet now and heavy. Abel tried swinging the stone around and around above his head with a gradually lengthening line and then releasing it like a boa. This simpler method worked better than the suspenders, but not enough better to matter. He pulled on the rope and sat beside it, clutching his head in his paws. The stubbornness of his character stood him now in good stead. He refused to consider himself defeated. A few minutes of gloomy pondering produced a new idea, a bridge of stepping stones. Why hadn't he thought of this simple scheme before? He would make piles of stones, using each pile as a step to build the next one, until he'd made enough to walk or hop his way across the river. He spent the rest of the day amassing a huge heap of pebbles and rock, going farther and farther afield to find them. By sundown he was so exhausted he lay down in his log without having eaten and fell asleep before the birds had finished making their final evening statements. The next morning, after wolfing a big breakfast, he stood in the water up to his neck, building the first step. He viewed it with satisfaction. He realized that the steps would have to be close together because he could make only a short leap carrying a heavy weight. He managed a second and a third step, and that was all. The would-be fourth step, which was started in swifter water, never formed because the current carried away the largest rocks Abel could handle. It was a hopeless project. The middle of the river, if ever he could reach it, was surely very deep, and even if the rocks held, the amount required to make a single step would be more than he could find on the island or carry in what remained of his life. He would keep thinking it was his family tradition never to give up, but to keep gnawing away until problems were solved. For the time being, however, he had run out of ideas. He began to develop an obstinate patience. The next few days he discovered additional sources of nourishment: groundnuts, mulberries, wild mustard, wild onions, new kinds of mushrooms, spearmint, peppermint, and milkweed. His former days of reading helped him identify these plants. He made a hammock of grass fibers and swung himself in it by pulling on a rope, swaying from side to side like a seaweed on the rolling sea, full of vacant wonder. He was stunned with his own solitude, his own silence. Every night he slept in the log. It had become half hotel, half home, but he still regarded the birch as the focal point of his comings and goings. He would often climb it to scan his surroundings and sit there chewing on a twig. By the end of the month of August, he knew he was an inhabitant of the island, whether he liked it or not. It was where he lived, just as a prison is where a prisoner lives. He thought constantly of Amanda. He thought of his parents, his brothers, sisters, friends. He knew they were grieving, and he was moved by their grief. He at least knew he was alive. They didn't. What was Amanda doing? How did her days drag out? Did she still write poetry? Was she able to eat, to sleep, to enjoy her existence in any way? Her image was in his mind, as clear as life sometimes, and he smiled with wistful tenderness, remembering her ways. Amanda was dreaming. It often seemed she was dreaming the real world around her, the things that were actually happening. She could dream Abel when he was right there by her side. Abel loved this dreaminess in her. He loved her dreamy eyes. Wherever he went about the island, he wore Amanda's scarf around his neck, the ends tied in a knot. He would not leave it in the log. Chapter 8. It was September when Abel evolved another scheme for getting home. He would catapult himself across the stream, with his clothes stuffed full of grass for a cushioned landing. Using a small stump as a winch, he tried with a rope to bend a sapling down to the ground so it could fling him over the water, but he managed to bend it only 2.5 taels. That was all the wood yielded to his strength, so this scheme, too, miscarried. A few days later, he succeeded in making fire. He had learned about the primitive methods in school, but he had never tried it for himself. After a series of failures, he finally found the right kind of stick to twirl and the right piece of dry wood and the right kind of tinder to flare with the first flame. His fires were as magical to him as they had been to his prehistoric ancestors. He first used his fires for smoke beacons to attract the attention of some civilized being who might just possibly be among the trees on the far shores. When he had a fire burning, he would partially cover it with damp leaves so that it sent up a thick white smoke. He learned to roast his seeds by placing them on rocks close to the fire. Later, he was able to cook various vegetables flavored with wild garlic or onions in pots, made of a reddish clay from the lower end of the island. The clay was baked hard in prolonged, intense firing. He also made paper-thin bowls of this clay, and from time to time he would float one down the river with a note in it, and a flower or sprig of grass sticking to attract notice. One of his notes: "Whoever reads this, please forward it to my wife, Amanda de Chirico Flynn, 89 Bank Street, Mossville. Dearest Angel, I am alive. I am alone on an island marooned somewhere above where this note will be found, God willing. There is a tall cherry birch on the northern end of the island. The island is about 12,000 taels long and is below a waterfall. Do not worry, but send help. My utmost and entire love, Abel. Whoever finds this, please send help too. I will be able to give a substantial reward." Sometimes Abel would climb to the top of his birch or some other tree and wave his white shirt up and down and back and forth for many minutes, hoping that someone would make a miraculous appearance, return his signal, and come to the rescue. There was no point in yelling. The river is too noisy for his "hellos" to carry. During the equinoctial rains, he spent the whole of a dismal day indoors, listening to the unceasing downpour on the outside of his log, watching it through his door and through portholes he had made, the infinite pall of falling rain, the sagging wet vegetation, the drops dripping from everything as if counting themselves, the runnels and pools, the misty distances, and feeling an ancient melancholy. Rain caused one to reflect on the shadowed, more poignant parts of life, the inescapable sorrows, the speechless longings, the disappointments, the regrets, the cold miseries. It also allowed one the leisure to ponder questions unasked in the bustle of brighter days, and if one were snug under a sound roof, as Abel was, one felt somehow mothered, though mothers were nowhere around and absolved of responsibilities. Abel had to cherish his dry log. At night, when it cleared up, he went out in the wet grass and watched the young moon vanishing behind clouds and reappearing over and over, like a swimmer out on the sea. Then he went inside the log, barred the entrance, and lay down with Amanda's scarf. Drugged with the aroma of rotting wood, he lost consciousness. There was a din of crickets outside, and the pauseless roar of the river, and the stately world was illumined with pearly moonlight, but inside the log it was dark and hushed, like a crypt. The castaway dreamed all night of Amanda. They were together again in their home, but their home was not 89 Bank Street, Mossville. It was a garden, something like this island and full of flowers. What was marvelous about this otherwise ordinary dream was that Abel knew he was dreaming and was certain that his wife was dreaming the very same dream at the same time, so that they were as close to each other as they'd ever been in the solid world.